So one of the things that's recognized worldwide is that our overall air traffic control infrastructure needs to be modernized. It's recognized in the U.S. There's a program called NextGen. It's also recognized in Europe. There's a parallel program called Single European Sky, or CESAR. And this is to take advantage of the new technologies we have in terms of navigation, like GPS, communication systems, like digital communication. Interestingly, I can get much more information, on my cell phone, both on the ground or even in the air through the wireless router, than the pilots can get in terms of weather or communication with the industry. The best digital communications we have today are ridiculously slow alphanumeric communications, either through a direct ground link or even through a satellite link. So there's a lot of interest in going to more modern communication systems, the airplanes. And then the other thing that's happening is a modernized, what we call surveillance system. Traditionally, air traffic control around the world is done by radar systems, where you have radars on the ground. In the more modern system, which is called automatic dependent surveillance, and particularly automatic dependent surveillance broadcast, almost all of the airplanes in the system know where they are to great precision, and they know what their speeds are and whatever. So in this modern surveillance system, what every airplane does is it sends out a digital text message once a second of its location, its velocity, and other information about the airplane. That information can be received by receivers on the ground, which are much cheaper than a traditional radar. And it can also be received by other airplanes in the vicinity. So with this system, with automatic dependent surveillance, you can see another airplane nearby. We've been involved with that. We're involved with it in a number of ways. We've been involved with it in terms of some of the air traffic control procedures. We're also involved with it in developing alerting systems that would be collision alerting systems using automatic dependent surveillance, particularly for small airplanes. There is a system today, TCAS, for large airplanes, but it doesn't work well for small airplanes where they tend to fly in very dense airspace, close to each other. So with this new surveillance system, automatic dependent surveillance, we can provide alerts that would be relevant to small airplanes, even when they're operating in small, close proximity in a traffic pattern in an uncontrolled airport. So this looks like we'll have a significant safety benefit for the small airplanes. The reason from a system standpoint that this is important is that in order for ADS-B to work as an overall surveillance system, essentially everybody has to have an ADS-B system on board their airplane, because if there's one airplane out there that doesn't have a transmitter, I won't see him, I could fly into him. So while the original ideas for ADS-B have a lot of benefit for airlines that fly every day, the equipment is somewhat expensive, and there was a concern that we weren't giving enough benefit for all the small airplanes that would also have to put on the equipment. So we've been involved in trying to develop ADS-B applications like this collision alerting system that would provide a significant benefit for the small general aviation airplanes. So it would be easier for them to justify putting on the equipment, and they would get a benefit out of this new system. ADS-B is active today. It's been, the U.S. has committed to it. We have an infrastructure around the country. The Canadians have committed to it, Europeans have committed to it, and other places like Australia have committed to it. And it makes a huge difference, by the way, in places in the developing world or that don't have good radar coverage. Because in a place like Australia, for example, we only have radar coverage on the east coast and a few spots in the west. So most of the outback doesn't have any radar. So 3 years ago, 4 years ago, if you were flying across the outback, it's the same as if you were flying in the middle of the Pacific. We would have to use the same procedures we use, which is to just keep airplanes apart by timing. Today, they've put in an ADS-B infrastructure throughout the outback because the stations are very cheap. And then that allows you to have radar-like surveillance, so we know where all the airplanes are that have this ADS-B equipment through the entire outback. We've done the same thing in northern Canada, in the Hudson Bay. There are now ADS-B stations in northern Canada. So this system is sort of propagating around the world as the more modern system. And it's, you know, one of the things that's really interesting is the place where the modernization of air transportation will probably have the biggest impact is not in the US and is not in Europe, because we already have good systems here, but is in developing parts of the world. You know, in particular, when we look around the world, China and India are the two places which have incredible latent air transportation demand. If you look in general, the amount of flying people do is a function of their GDP. So if you look at the GDP per capita of the US or Europe, we're fairly high and we do a lot of flying. If you look at the GDP per capita of China and India, it's fairly low, and the amount of flying that's done per person is fairly small. However, we expect there's a standard trend where as the GDP goes up, the amount of flying goes up. As the GDP per capita in those regions, China and India, increase, because their populations are so large, we expect an enormous growth of air transportation in those regions. So that's really where a lot of the action is in Asia and in South America and ultimately in Africa, where we'll see the modernization of the air transportation infrastructure, a significant increase in flying. And it's really critical to, you know, we believe, in studies that we've conducted show that there's a strong link between your air transportation infrastructure and the connectivity to the rest of the world and the ability of an economy to grow. So there's a very strong link between air transportation and economic development. We don't know what causes that, so we don't know for sure that air transportation enables economic development, but we know that, you know, there are no examples of strong economies in the world that don't have strong economic links or strong air transportation links.